What's going on, everybody? Today I'm going to be going over the top 8 most confusing rules for Star Wars Unlimited. I actually read the entire comprehensive rules so that you don't have to. Let's dig in. So the first confusing rule, this one is probably not super confusing for most of you, but for a lot of new players, this is a confusing rule, and I put it as number 1. These are going to get progressively more advanced as we go through the top 8. The first one is ambushing and readying. So this is most commonly seen with Energy Conversion Lab. So with Energy Conversion Lab, let's read the card. Epic action, play a unit that costs 6 or less from your hand, give it ambush for this phase. So what you can do is you can ambush a unit from your hand that doesn't already have ambush on the card. So this can create some confusing interactions. And just so we're all on the same page here, ambush is a keyword whose effect is the same as the triggered ability. When played, if there is an enemy unit that this unit can attack, this unit may ready and attack that enemy unit. So that's what ambush does. So you get to play something, and if there's a unit in that arena or a valid attack target for that unit, they can attack that. They can ready the same turn they're played and attack in all the same action as playing it. So this gets really confusing with things like Fett's Fire Spray. So Fett's Fire Spray says, when played, if you control Boba Fett or Jango Fett as a leader or a unit, ready this unit. So Fett's Fire Spray can actually come into play ready. So what happens here? How do you resolve this? Does Fett's Fire Spray, come into play, and then does it get to ambush, and then is it left tap? But what's interesting is the active player gets to choose how when played abilities are resolved. So ambush so Energy Conversion Lab gives a unit ambush, which is a when played ability, and Fett's Fire Spray has its own when played ability. So you can choose how you want to stack those. So what makes Fett's Fire Spray really strong here is you can actually stack it so that the ambush from Energy Conversion Lab readies Fett's Fire Spray, and then he gets to attack. And then you can choose to resolve second the when played ability from Fett's Fire Spray, which is when played, if you control Boba Fett, ready this unit. And in this game, everything enters tapped or exhausted, or I forget the term for it. It enters exhausted unless it says otherwise. So everything in the game, even resources, will enter play exhausted unless the card says to ready it or something else. And so this is a pretty common confusion early on, and if this is news to you, I'm glad I was able to bring that to you. But this is where things get even a little bit more complicated. So we're going to bring in a third card here, Millennium Falcon. So Millennium Falcon does something very similar, but it's not identical. So instead of a when played ability, Millennium Falcon has a static ability that this unit enters play ready. So it comes into play ready. It doesn't come into play tapped and untap. It actually contradicts one of the core rules of the game, and it comes into play ready. So this is interesting because you have to understand enters play instead of when played. And so Falcon, if you play Millennium Falcon with Energy Conversion Lab, you'll play Millennium Falcon, it'll come into play ready, and then you can resolve ambush and attack a unit. And unfortunately, Millennium Falcon will not remain untapped, whereas with Fett's Fire Spray, you can ambush it in and then untap it again right away, because then you can resolve its Fett's Fire Spray's own innate ability, which is when played, ready this unit if you control Boba Fett or Jango Fett as a leader or a unit. And so Fett's Fire Spray is clearly a better card to ambush than Millennium Falcon, because unfortunately this small change in text here means that Millennium Falcon will not be able to attack twice like Fett's Fire Spray can with Energy Conversion Lab. So that's just an interesting thing you need to be aware of in this game, that enters play versus when played. The second, I'd say most common confusing rule is shields and removal. I don't think this is super complicated, but I have seen this mistake. Shields can be confusing for newer players because in other games, shields usually prevent you from being destroyed or dying or something like that. But in this game, shields only protect from an instance of damage. Whether that's 1 damage or 1 billion damage, a shield will absorb all of it. But if you've been around the block, you've encountered this one where somebody plays Make an Opening, give a unit -2/-2 for this phase, and heal 2 damage from your base. So if you target Crafty Smuggler with this card, anytime a card has 0 or below 1, 0 toughness, it is immediately considered defeated instantly. So shields, so the -2/-2 and defeat effects cut through shields and actually completely eliminate a unit. That one's pretty simple, but I felt like it had to be in here because you never know. I'm here to be helpful to newer players and experienced players. The third most confusing rule, I'd say, is completing an attack. So what's interesting about completing an attack is that this one actually took me by surprise after I read the original rules before the comprehensive rules came out. I had thought that this completing an attack was similar to on attack. What's interesting is that this ability comes with an additional caveat. You need to survive the attack in order to complete this ability. So if Ezra Bridger attacks into a 4/4 Sentinel, for example, you do not get to look at the top card of your deck and play it, discard it, or leave it on top, because Ezra doesn't complete the attack. Ezra was defeated before that attack was completely was completed, and Ezra Bridger is not able to see its own ability. Ezra Bridger as a card is no longer in play. It was defeated before its ability was able to happen. And this created a lot of frustrating circumstances for me where I thought, hey, I'm going to attack into Ezra had 1 damage on him, and I attacked into a 3/3 Sentinel thinking I could look at the top card of my deck, and my opponent was like, nope, you can't do that, and it definitely makes this card a little bit worse. If it said on attack, look at the top card, then hey, it's on attack, you get to do it, but it's actually when it completes. And it doesn't just impact Ezra Bridger, it also impacts Boba Fett. So when this unit completes an attack, if an enemy unit left play this phase, ready up to 2 resources. So if Boba Fett attacks into a 7 power unit and it has, let's say, 3 damage on it, Boba Fett will defeat that unit, but Boba Fett himself will actually not be able to untap 2 resources because Boba Fett will be defeated before his ability can happen. And this is what's interesting, is Boba Fett, I'm actually going to pivot this into the 4th one. Boba Fett actually, as a unit, has another interesting interaction. So that's going to be the 4th rule. So that's just something you got to keep in mind when you're completing an attack. If a card has that as a criteria for meeting its ability, you got to make sure that unit will survive. Next is leaders always being in play. This was something that, as a newer player, very much confused me. It's a counterintuitive rule. I don't think this is very intuitive when you play the game, just because how games are played. So, how do I put it? So leaders are always in play from the start of the game, even on your leader side. So I got a bunch of leaders over here. So here's Iden. So here's the Iden leader card, right? And Boba Fett defeating an enemy leader unit does not ready resources. So if Boba Fett attacks into a 4/4 leader and defeats that leader, Boba Fett, if no other unit had left play this turn, Boba Fett cannot ready resources, because when a unit is defeated, let's say Boba Fett attacks into an Iden with no shield, Iden is a 4/4, and Iden goes back to its leader zone, Iden doesn't leave play, Iden just kind of transforms back into its leader side. And that's what's really interesting, is when you play a leader, when you deploy a leader from its leader side to a unit, that is not considered playing a card. That is just deploying your leader. And so it's a very nuanced rule. But again, I'll say it again, leaders are in play from the start of the game. And so Boba Fett cannot defeat a leader. There's other cards in the game, like Fighters for Freedom. When you play a red card, you get to do 1 damage to an opponent's base. For the first couple games that I played, when I would deploy Sabine, I would say, oh, Sabine does a damage to your base because I deployed Sabine as a leader. But you're not playing a card, you're deploying the leader. It's a very nuanced, a little bit counterintuitive rule. But I've caught a lot of newer players not seeing this. I've actually caught some experienced players not seeing this because they forget, because sometimes you just forget that there's a leader out there. It's really easy to miss. So this is actually going to go into a bonus odd rule. I wanted to keep it 8, not 9, but what's really interesting is I found this in the comprehensive rules. If a leader unit would leave play or change control for any reason, it is just immediately defeated instead. Which means that as of right now, you will never be able to take control over your opponent's leader. It is actually impossible given the current rules. Unless they modify the rules, you will never be able to take control of someone's leader for a turn. If they print a future card that does that, as it stands right now, that will be impossible, which is interesting, to say the least. And I gotta say, this Leia art is amazing. All right, so the fifth rule here, the fifth most confusing rule, is stacking effects. I put Ewing reinforcement here, but it's actually, I decided last minute to change to Darth Vader. So what's interesting about this game, if you're playing Darth Vader and you get to look at the top 10 cards of your deck, you get to choose how you resolve effects. And I'm gonna kind of show what this means in a second. So let's say you play Darth Vader number 1. 2, you search the top 10 cards of your deck. 3, you play one of those top 10 cards. And 4, and then you resolve any effects that that card does, right? And then 4, you get to ambush with Darth Vader. So you don't you can choose if you ambush first or if you use the one played. So this kind of goes back to the very first rule that I gave about ambush with Energy Conversion Lab, but I did break it out because I felt like this one's a little bit more complicated, even though they're both stacking effects. So does this matter? Absolutely it does. For example, there might be a reason why you want to change these around. Maybe you want to play a Death Trooper with Darth Vader's ability and get 2 damage on something first. Maybe there's a Sentinel out there that has 1 damage left on it, and the Death Trooper can remove that Sentinel so that Darth Vader can ambush a 5/5 and remove it, right? So possibility of getting on Sentinels, or like, for example, Greedo's when defeated triggers. There's all these weird things you can do with Darth Vader because you get to choose how those abilities resolve. Moving on here. This one is something that applies in Magic the Gathering, and in this game it's called a lasting effect. So I'm just going to read the rule. So by default, a lasting effect only applies to a card that's in play at the time of the lasting effect's creation. For a lasting effect to affect a card in an out-of-play zone, the ability created that effect must explicitly say that it will do that. So for example, any unit played after Rallying Cry does not get Raid 2 for the turn. And Rallying Cry says each friendly unit gains Raid 2 this phase. So it's only the units that are out in one of your arenas, space or ground, that when you play this card, those are the units that get it, not future cards that you play. All right. The 7th rule here is lose and loses effects. This is a pretty confusing one. I'm going to read the comprehensive rules first, and then I'll kind of explain it in layman's terms. So if an ability causes a unit to lose a keyword, the unit ceases to have the specified keyword in any abilities granting that keyword when the lose effect is resolved. Cease granting the keyword for the duration of the lose effect. Unless otherwise specified, the unit can regain that keyword through new effects. So for example, if you're to play Spec Force Soldier on a Sentinel card and you were to remove its Sentinel, if somebody played Protector on that same card, a unit can regain an effect after losing it. So Spec Force Soldier removes Sentinel, you can play Protector and re-give that unit a different layer of Sentinel. And that's how keywords are actually applied to units, is that there's layers. If a card has Sentinel and you play a card on top of it that gives it Sentinel, those are different layers of Sentinel. So Spec Force Soldier removes one layer of Sentinel, but does not prevent future layers from being stacked on top of it, right? So Spec Force Soldier doesn't say a unit cannot have Sentinel for this phase. It just says it loses it for this phase. If Spec Force Soldier said that this unit cannot gain Sentinel, then it wouldn't gain it for the whole turn. But Spec Force Soldier does not say that. All right. Number 8 here, naming a card. So I left the best one for last here. I assume pretty much no one that I've pointed this out to knows this yet. And I read the whole comprehensive rules to figure this card out. And it's about Regional Governor. So Regional Governor says, when played, name a card. While this unit is in play, opponents can't play the named card. So what's interesting is they actually put something quite powerful in the comprehensive rules. And I'm just going to read that real quick. These abilities do not account for subtitles, namely the Regional Governor ability. The player does not need to specify a subtitle when naming a card. So for example, if they print more Luke Skywalkers, there's many, they can print, Jedi Knight Luke Skywalker, they can print Jedi Master Luke Skywalker, they can print The Force Awakens Luke Skywalker. There could be, in a couple years from now, 7 Luke Skywalkers. That is not out of the question. And they've kind of hinted that they can reprint cards with alternative subtitles they're already doing it. There's a leader, there's a leader Luke Skywalker and a unit one. So they're already kind of doing that. Who's to say that they can't print, you know, Book of Boba Fett, right? The older version of Boba Fett. Who's to say that they won't do that? And that card is probably going to have the name Boba Fett. So in the future, for example, this card will actually prevent all variations of that card from being played. So if there is 5 Luke Skywalkers or 3 Boba Fetts in print, if you play Regional Governor and you say Boba Fett, it'll actually prevent people from playing multiple versions of the same card. So that means that this card is only going to get stronger. I did not realize this was true until I read this rule. And it may seem obvious at first to some people, but it was not to me. And I think this card is just going to be one of those staple cards for years to come. It's going to scale very well with the game. It's very possible, the way that the sets are happening, that they could print a second or third Luke Skywalker in the next year and a half. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case. And that means that Regional Governor's probably going to be a staple sideboard card for the next 2 years, or a staple mainboard card for the next 2 years. I can't say for sure, but if they were to do this, it would not surprise me if this card was extremely playable. So there was quite a few other rules that I left out. I didn't want to make this video too long. Let me know what your most confusing rule is, one that tripped you up, in the comments below, or maybe a rule that you thought should have been in the video but I didn't put in here. And there was actually 2 in my head right now that I didn't add to make it a nice 10, but I wanted to keep the video a bit shorter. So definitely let me know in the comments below what y'all think. And then lastly, I know I've been harping on it, but most of y'all are not subscribed, so definitely hit that subscribe button, and I hope to see you in the future. Thanks.